She found a rusted key in her father's toolbox. It opened a barn sealed since 1954. The key to my entire life, past and future, was handed to me in a cardboard box sealed with yellowing tape. It was my 18th birthday. It was also my last day. My last day in the system. My last day at the Northwood Group Home for Girls. My last day of being anyone's responsibility but my own. Mrs. Gable, the house supervisor whose smile never quite reached her eyes, slid the box across the polished linoleum of her desk. "This is it, Ilara. Everything your father left in storage." The box was small. It seemed impossible that a whole life, even one as fractured as my father's, could be contained in something I could carry with one hand. But then again, his life hadn't been whole. It had been pieces, and I was the last one left. I stood there, clutching the worn strap of my duffel bag, the only other thing I owned in the world. The air in the office smelled of disinfectant and regret. If you've ever felt that moment, that terrifying drop when you realize you are completely and utterly on your own, then you know what I was feeling. It's a story a lot of us share in different ways. If you're one of those people, if you've ever felt like you were starting from zero, I hope you'll stick around. Maybe even hit that subscribe button. We tell stories for people like us here, the ones who had to build a home inside themselves because there wasn't one waiting. I didn't open the box in her office. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing whatever was inside, whether it was a treasure or just more dust and disappointment. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "The bus ticket is on top of the envelope," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "And the letter from the county solicitor. It's all very clear. You have 90 days. 90 days. The words echoed in the sterile room. 90 days to deal with the one thing my father had managed to hold on to. A piece of land, a house, and a debt. A property in a town I'd never heard of called Sparrow Creek. According to the solicitor's letter, which I'd read until the cheap paper felt like cloth, he'd inherited it from his grandfather, a man I never knew existed. And for the last 10 years, while I was bouncing between foster homes and my father was, well, wherever he was, the property taxes had gone unpaid. The debt was a monster, a figure with so many zeros it looked like a joke. The 90 days were the county's final offer before they seized the land and sold it at auction. My inheritance was a countdown. "Good luck, Ilara," Mrs. Gable said. It sounded less like a wish and more like a dismissal. I picked up the box. It was lighter than I expected. Of course it was. I walked out of Northwood without looking back, the squeak of my worn sneakers the only sound marking my exit from the first half of my life. The bus smelled of stale coffee and diesel fumes. I found a seat by a window smeared with the greasy fingerprints of 100 other transient lives. I placed the cardboard box on the seat beside me, a silent, unreadable companion. For the first hour, I just watched the city dissolve. The concrete towers and grids of manicured lawns bled into strip malls, then into patchy suburbs, and finally into the wide, unblinking expanse of the countryside. The sky grew bigger, the world grew quieter. It was out here, with nothing but rolling hills and the hum of the engine, that I finally decided to look. My fingers trembled as I broke the brittle tape. The sound was like a sigh. Inside, there wasn't much. A stack of faded photographs held together with a rubber band, mostly of a man with my father's eyes and a woman I didn't recognize, squinting in the sun. A thin, silver watch that didn't work. A dog-eared paperback copy of a book about stars. And at the bottom, a small red metal toolbox, the kind a kid might own. It was dented and the paint was chipped, but the clasp was still strong. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. There were no tools inside, no hammers or wrenches. Just a single object nestled in the center of the rusted bottom. It was a key, It was huge, made of heavy, dark iron, the kind you see in movies about castles and dungeons. The head was a simple, unadorned oval, and the shaft was long and thick. The teeth at the end were complex, a pattern of squares and notches that spoke of a lock built to last. Rust flaked off onto my fingers, leaving reddish-brown stains. It was cold to the touch, a deep, ancient cold, as if it had been lying at the bottom of a lake. There was no tag, no label. It was just a key, a question mark made of metal. I closed my hand around it, the sharp edges digging into my palm. It felt important. It felt like the only thing in the box that mattered. The rest of the journey passed in a blur of green and gray. I held the key in my pocket, its weight a constant, grounding presence. I thought about my father. I didn't have many memories of him, not clear ones anyway. They were more like snapshots, feelings. The scratch of his beard against my cheek, the smell of sawdust and cheap cigarettes, the low rumble of his voice when he tried to sing me to sleep. He was a carpenter, a handyman, a man who could fix anything but himself. He'd left when I was 7. Not in a dramatic storm out, but in a slow fade, like a photograph left in the sun. One day he was there, the next he wasn't. The social workers said he'd gone to find work up north. They said a lot of things. I spent the next decade in the care of the state, a file in a cabinet, a name on a list. I learned to be quiet, to be invisible, to not expect anything from anyone. And now, this key, this land, this debt. It wasn't a fresh start. It felt like being handed the last chapter of a book I'd never been allowed to read. The bus pulled into Sparrow Creek just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the bruised purple clouds in shades of orange and pink. The town wasn't so much a town as a crossroads. A gas station with a flickering sign, a diner with 2 cars parked out front, a post office, and a handful of houses with sagging porches. That was it. The bus hissed to a stop, the doors folding open with a groan. "Sparrow Creek," the driver called out, not looking back. I was the only one who got off. I stood on the cracked pavement, my duffel bag over my shoulder and the box under my arm, and watched the bus pull away, its red taillights shrinking until they were swallowed by the twilight. The silence it left behind was absolute. It was the kind of deep, ringing quiet that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. For a long moment, I felt a surge of pure panic. I could just turn around, stick out my thumb, and get a ride to anywhere else. I could sell the ticket back and disappear. No one would miss me. No one would even know. But the weight of the key in my pocket held me there. It was a strange feeling, to be anchored by a mystery. The address on the solicitor's letter was a mile out of town, down a dirt road that branched off the main highway. The walk was long. The air grew cool and smelled of damp earth and pine needles. The road was more of a suggestion, 2 ruts carved into the land, and the trees pressed in on either side, their branches tangling overhead to form a dark tunnel. By the time I saw the mailbox, it was nearly full dark. It was tilted on its post like a drunk, the name Whitman barely visible under a crust of rust and lichen. Whitman, that was his name, my grandfather's. The name of the man I'd never met. A wrought iron gate, half devoured by ivy, hung open on a single hinge. I pushed it aside and stepped onto the property. My property. The word felt alien in my mind. The driveway was a ghost, almost completely reclaimed by weeds and saplings. And then I saw the house. It was a silhouette against the last light in the sky, a dark, hunched shape that seemed more like a geological formation than something built by human hands. It was a simple, 2-story farmhouse, but time and neglect had worked it over. The porch roof sagged in the middle, the windows were dark, vacant eyes, and the paint had been scoured away by decades of wind and rain, leaving the wood bare and silvered. It looked haunted, not by ghosts, but by a profound and suffocating loneliness. I felt a strange kinship with it. I found the front door key in the envelope from the solicitor. a new, shiny brass key that looked ridiculous against the ancient, weathered wood. The lock was stiff, but it turned. The door swung inward on a long, complaining groan, opening into a darkness that felt solid, a wall of stale, cold air. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with cold and nerves, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut a shaky path through the gloom. Dust. Everything was coated in a thick, soft blanket of gray dust. Furniture huddled under white sheets like a family of ghosts. The air was heavy with the smell of decay, of mouse droppings and slow rot. My light caught the glint of a dusty mirror over a fireplace, and for a second, I saw a stranger looking back. A pale, wide-eyed girl with a smudge of dirt on her cheek, looking small and lost in the cavernous dark. I couldn't stay in there, not that night. I backed out, pulling the door shut, and leaned against the railing of the sagging porch, my heart hammering against my ribs. I slid down to sit on the steps, pulling my knees to my chest. The 90-day deadline felt both like an eternity and no time at all. What was I supposed to do? The back taxes were more money than I had ever imagined. The only way to pay them would be to sell the land. The lawyer's letter had mentioned that a development company, some corporation with a bland, generic name, had already made a standing offer. It was a generous one, he'd written, enough to set me up for life, enough to walk away from all of this and never look back. It was the smart choice, the only choice. And yet, I looked out past the house. The flashlight beam from my phone was weak, but I could make out the shapes of the land. A wide, overgrown field that sloped down toward a line of dark trees. And to the right of the house, set back a little, was another building. It was huge, bigger than the house, its roofline a sharp, dark peak against the star-dusted sky. A barn. It loomed in the darkness, silent and immense. It felt different from the house. The house was just decaying, giving up. The barn felt watchful, waiting. I got up and walked toward it, the tall, wet grass soaking the cuffs of my jeans. The closer I got, the more imposing it became. It was an old-style barn, built from massive, dark timbers and wide planks of wood that had weathered to the color of slate. But it was the doors that held my attention. They were massive, a double set of sliding doors that must have been 20 feet high. And they were sealed. Not just closed, but sealed. A thick, heavy plank of wood had been bolted horizontally across the seam where the two doors met. The bolts were huge, their heads rusted into solid, immovable lumps. And above the plank, crudely painted in faded white letters, was a date, 1954. For 60-plus years, this barn had been locked away. Why? What was inside that was so important to protect, or so dangerous to release? My hand went to my pocket, to the cold, heavy weight of the iron key. It felt like it was humming, vibrating with a low energy. I pulled it out. It looked ancient, from another time. It looked like it belonged to a lock made in 1954. There was a smaller door set into the larger one, a normal-sized pedestrian entrance. It had a lock, a massive iron plate lock that matched the key perfectly. The keyhole was dark, clogged with cobwebs and dirt. I used a twig to clear it out, my heart starting to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. This was the reason I was here. I could feel it. The key slid into the lock. It was a snug fit, metal grinding against rusted metal. For a moment I thought it was stuck. I put both hands on the oval head of the key and turned. It resisted. I put my shoulder into it, gritting my teeth, pushing with all my weight. There was a horrible, scraping groan from inside the lock, a sound of protest from deep within the mechanism, as tumblers that hadn't moved in more than half a century were forced to shift. And then, with a loud, definitive clunk, the lock turned. The sound was like a gunshot in the profound silence of the night. I stood there for a second, breathing heavily, my hands still on the key. I had done it. I had unlocked it. But the door didn't budge. I pulled the key out and tried the handle. Nothing. It was swollen shut, sealed by decades of damp and shifting foundations. I threw my shoulder against it. Once, twice. The wood was unyielding. Frustrated, I took a few steps back, looking for something, anything, to use as a lever. My flashlight beam danced across the overgrown yard and landed on a rusted old crowbar lying half buried in the weeds near the foundation of the house. It was heavy, but it felt good in my hands, solid and purposeful. I wedged the tip into the crack of the doorframe and leaned back. The wood groaned. Splinters popped. I repositioned it and pushed again, putting every ounce of my fear and frustration and desperate hope into it. With a final, soul-shaking shriek of tortured wood, the door flew open, slamming against the inside of the barn and plunging me forward into the darkness within. The air that rushed out to meet me was a physical thing. It was thick, cold, and utterly still, carrying the scent of dry hay, old wood, and something else. Something faintly metallic and clean, like cold stone. It was the smell of time itself. I stood on the threshold, my phone's flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the blackness. The inside of the barn was cavernous. The ceiling soared up into a cathedral of shadows, crisscrossed by massive beams as thick as my body. The floor was packed earth, surprisingly clean and swept. Light from my phone glinted off something, and I aimed the beam. A tractor. An old green tractor with huge, rust-pitted wheels, looking like a sleeping dinosaur. Beside it was a hay rake and a plow, all from another era. But the rest of the barn was empty. Strangely, unnaturally empty. There were no stacks of hay bales, no piles of junk, no forgotten tools or clutter. It was just this vast, open space. And it was clean. The dust here wasn't the thick, fluffy blanket that covered the house. It was a fine, settled layer, as if the place had been meticulously swept and then left undisturbed for a lifetime. My light drifted across the floor and stopped. In the center of the vast, empty space was a large, rectangular shape covered by a heavy canvas tarp. It was the only other thing in the barn besides the old farm equipment. It was about 10 feet long and 5 feet wide, a low, dark island in a sea of packed earth. My boots made no sound as I walked toward it. The silence in the barn was absolute, a heavy presence that seemed to absorb all sound. I reached the tarp. It was stiff with age, the canvas thick and coarse. I found a corner and lifted it. The material was heavy, and a cloud of fine dust puffed into the air, making me cough. I pulled the tarp all the way back, letting it fall into a heap on the floor. I shone my light on what it had been hiding. It wasn't a piece of equipment. It was a chest. A massive, iron-bound wooden chest, the kind you'd call a steamer trunk. It was made of a dark, almost black wood, reinforced with straps of iron and held together with big, round rivets. It was a beautiful, formidable object, and it had a lock, a heavy brass padlock that had tarnished to a deep, greenish brown. There was no keyhole. It was a combination lock, with 4 rotating dials, each marked with letters of the alphabet instead of numbers. A 4-letter code. It could be anything. A name, a date, a word. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. To come this far, to find this, only to be stopped by a lock I could never open. I sat down on the cold earth floor, the beam of my flashlight playing over the letters on the dials. I tried the obvious things. Love. Hope. Home. Nothing. I tried the name on the mailbox. WHIT. That wasn't even 4 letters. I tried the year on the door. 1954. Those were numbers. I felt tears of frustration welling in my eyes. It was hopeless. I was about to give up, to throw the tarp back over it and walk away, when my light happened to fall on the old tractor again. It was a John Deere. I could just make out the faded yellow lettering on the green paint. And I remembered something, a fragment of a memory, a snapshot. My father, lifting me up onto the seat of a tractor just like this one at a county fair. I must have been 4 or 5. He smelled of popcorn and gasoline. He'd pointed to the leaping deer logo. "What's that, Ilara?" he'd asked. "A deer," I'd said. He'd laughed. "That's right, leaping forward, always forward." Leaping forward, 4 letters, F-O-R-D. No, that didn't feel right. What about the animal? D-E-E-R. I scrambled back to the trunk, my fingers fumbling with the cold brass dials. I spun them, my heart pounding. D-E-E-R. I lined them up and pulled on the shackle of the padlock. There was a soft, metallic click. It opened. The sound was so small in the vastness of the barn, but it felt like a symphony. The padlock fell away into my hand. For a long moment, I just stared at the chest, my breath held tight in my chest. This was it, the secret of the barn. The reason for the lock, the bolts, the 60 years of silence. With trembling hands, I reached for the heavy iron latches on the front of the trunk. I lifted them, the metal groaning in protest. I took a deep breath, and I opened the lid. The inside was lined with dark velvet that had faded to a dusty purple. And it was full. Not with gold or jewels, but with paper. Stacks and stacks of paper, tied neatly with twine. There were journals bound in worn leather, thick manila envelopes sealed with wax, and bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. On the very top, resting on a stack of journals, was a single thick envelope made of heavy, cream-colored paper. My name was written on the front in elegant, old-fashioned cursive. Ilara. Just my name. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely pick it up. The paper felt heavy, important. There was no seal. I opened the flap and pulled out the folded pages within. The letter began. "My dearest Ilara, if you are reading this, then I am long gone from this world, and you have found your way home. I hope the journey was not too difficult. My name is Arthur Whitman, and I was your great-grandfather. I do not know what you have been told of our family, or of your father. I fear it is not much, and for that, I am truly sorry. We live in complicated times, and sometimes the only way to protect the ones we love is to let them go. But the truth has a way of waiting. And the truth is waiting for you here, in this barn, in this chest." I had to stop reading. My eyes were blurry with tears. I wiped them away with the back of my hand and continued, my flashlight beam shaking on the page. In 1954, I sealed this barn. I did so to protect a secret and to preserve a legacy. It was not a legacy of wealth, my dear, but of principle. Our family, the Whitmans, were printers. For generations, we owned a small press in the city. We printed books, pamphlets, newspapers. We believed in the power of the written word, the power to speak truth, to question authority, to give voice to the voiceless. In the early 1950s, a shadow fell over our country. A paranoia, a fear of ideas. People were being accused, their names blackened, their lives destroyed, for what they believed, for what they wrote, for who they associated with. It was a time of whispers and lists, a time when neighbors turned on neighbors. Our press printed the words of many writers and thinkers who were deemed subversive. We did not do it for politics. We did it because we believe that a free country requires free expression, even for ideas that are unpopular or uncomfortable. For this, we came under scrutiny. We were watched. We were threatened. My friends, good and decent people, lost their jobs, their homes. Some went to prison. The script was beautiful, but the words were heavy, each one landing on me like a stone. I could feel the cold of the packed earth floor seeping into my bones. Then came the night that changed everything. A friend of mine, a brilliant poet named Samuel Reed, came to my door. His name was on a list. He was to be arrested the next morning. He had not committed any crime, save for writing poems that questioned the wisdom of the powerful. He was a gentle soul, a man who saw beauty in a world that was growing increasingly ugly. He had a wife and a young daughter. To be arrested then was to lose everything. He was terrified. He asked me to hide him. It was a dangerous request. To harbor a subversive was a crime in itself. It could have meant prison for me, the seizure of my business, the ruin of my family. My wife, your great-grandmother Eleanor, and I talked all night. We knew the risk, but we also knew what was right. How could we preach the importance of free expression in our pamphlets and then turn away a man whose only crime was to express himself? We couldn't. We agreed to help, but where could we hide him? Our house was being watched. That's when I thought of the barn. Here, on this farm we had bought as a weekend escape from the city, was a place they would never think to look. That night, I drove Samuel and his family out here. We brought them to the barn. In the back, behind a false wall in the old tack room, I had built a small, hidden apartment. It wasn't much, but it was safe. It had a bed, a stove, a small library of books. We brought them food once a week, in the dead of night. They lived back there for almost 2 years. 2 years of silence and shadow. To protect them, to ensure no one would ever stumble upon them by accident, I sealed the barn. I put the plank across the doors and painted the date on it, 1954, as a marker, a warning and a promise. I told the few neighbors we had that the foundation was cracked and it was unsafe. The story held. No one ever went near it. I looked up from the letter, my gaze sweeping across the vast, silent space. A hidden apartment, a family living in secret. It seemed impossible. My light found a door on the far wall I hadn't noticed before, half hidden in the deep shadows. The tack room. Samuel and his family eventually made it to Canada, where they were given asylum. They lived out their lives in freedom. We never saw them again, but they wrote every year until they passed. Their letters are in this chest. We never regretted our choice, but it came at a cost. The government eventually found a way to shut down our press on a tax violation. We lost the business that had been in our family for a century. We sold our home in the city and moved here, to this farm, permanently. We lived a quiet life. We raised your grandfather Henry here. We taught him what we believed, that what you own is not as important as what you stand for. That legacy is not about money. It is about the choices you make when things are hard. Your father Thomas grew up here too, hearing these stories. But the world had changed. He saw our quiet pride as foolishness. He saw the poverty we lived in as a failure. He loved this land, but he also resented it, resented the sacrifice it represented. He wanted more. When we died, he inherited this place, but he couldn't wait to leave it behind. I believe he was ashamed of us, of our choice. He saw the money we could have had, the life of comfort we gave up. He didn't understand that we chose a different kind of wealth. I am telling you this, Ilara, because this land is now yours. And the choice is now yours. In this chest you will find all of Samuel's letters. You will also find the original deed to this property. And in a false bottom, you will find something else. It is not a fortune, but it is what we managed to save. It was meant to be a start for whichever of our line found their way back here and understood. The world will tell you to sell this land. There are developers who have wanted it for years. They will offer you a great deal of money, enough to make you forget the story I have just told you. You could take that money and build a comfortable life, and no one would blame you. Your father would have wanted you to. But I am asking you to consider another path. This place is not just dirt and wood. It is a monument to a single, difficult choice. It is proof that two people, in a time of fear, chose kindness over safety and principle over profit. To sell it would be to erase that story forever. To keep it To keep it would be hard. It would mean debt and work and struggle. But it would also mean you have a home that is built on something more solid than money. It is built on courage. The choice is yours, my dear granddaughter. I will not be there to guide you. You must listen to your own heart. Whatever you decide, know that you are a Whitman, and you are loved. The letter fell from my fingers. I sat there, on the cold floor of the barn, the single beam of my phone's light illuminating the swirling dust, and I felt the weight of 60 years settle on my shoulders. I was no longer just a Lara, the girl from the group home. I was a Lara Whitman, the inheritor of a secret, a legacy, and an impossible choice. I spent the rest of the night in that barn. I found the false wall in the tack room. It was cleverly made, a section of the wall that swung inward when you pressed a specific knot in the wood. Behind it was a small, two-room apartment. It was just as he'd described it. A narrow bed with a rotted mattress, a small wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves filled with books. It was dusty and smelled of mice, but it was undeniably real. A family had lived here, in hiding, their world confined to these 4 walls, their lives dependent on the courage of my great-grandparents. Back in the main part of the barn, I found the false bottom of the trunk. Tucked beneath the velvet lining was a metal cash box. Inside were stacks of old bills, bundled with paper bands. I didn't count it, but it looked like a lot. More money than I'd ever seen in one place. But his words echoed in my head. It is not a fortune. It was probably enough to pay a portion of the back taxes, but not all of it. Not even close. It was seed money, a test. I spent hours reading Samuel Reed's letters. They were beautiful, filled with poetry and profound gratitude. He wrote of the terror of the world outside and the small, sacred peace of their hidden life. He wrote of my great-grandmother bringing his daughter a handful of wildflowers, a splash of color in their gray existence. He wrote of my great-grandfather, a quiet, strong man who would sit with him for hours, talking about books and ideas, a lifeline to the world of the mind he had been forced to flee. These weren't just letters, they were a testament. As dawn began to break, casting pale gray light through the grimy barn windows, I knew what I had to do. But knowing and doing are 2 very different things. The next day, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe the screen. Hello? My voice was hoarse. Is this Ms. Ilara Vance? A man's voice asked. It was smooth, professional. My father's name was Whitman, I said, the name feeling new and strange on my tongue. This is Ilara Whitman. There was a brief pause. Ah, yes, of course, Ms. Whitman. This is David Henderson. I'm an attorney representing Sterling Development Partners. I was also the solicitor who sent you the notice regarding the property in Sparrow Creek. My stomach tightened. Sterling Development Partners. The developers. I'm calling as a courtesy, Ms. Whitman. I know your situation is unique, and I wanted to reach out personally to discuss the offer my clients have on the table for your property. I leaned against the rough wood of the barn door, the morning sun warm on my face. I've read about it. Good. It's a very strong offer. Frankly, it's more than the land is worth, especially given the dilapidated state of the structures. My clients are very eager to acquire the parcel. It's key to a larger community project they are planning. A golf course, luxury homes. It will bring a lot of prosperity to the area. Prosperity. The word sounded obscene. I thought of the small, hidden apartment of a family living in fear. The offer, he continued, his voice slick and persuasive, is for $1.5 million. That's after all back taxes and liens on the property are settled. A clean check, Ms. Whitman. Enough to change your life. New car, new house, college education, whatever you want. A fresh start with no strings attached. $1.5 million. The number was so large it was abstract. It was a fairy tale. It was the winning lottery ticket. It was the answer to every problem I had ever had and every problem I could imagine having. I could walk away from this rotting house, this haunted barn, this crushing debt. I could be free. I could be a normal person with a savings account and a future that wasn't a question mark. It was everything my father would have wanted for me. Security, comfort, an easy life. He had run from this legacy, and he would have told me to do the same. Run and don't look back. Miss Whitman, are you there? Mr. Henderson's voice cut through my thoughts. I'm here, I whispered. It's a lot to take in, I know. Take your time. But the 90-day clock is ticking. My clients are prepared to close as soon as you give the word. We can have the paperwork drawn up by the end of the week. You could be on a beach somewhere by next month. This all a distant memory. A distant memory. He wanted me to erase it, to pave over this story with a golf course, to turn a monument to courage into a sand trap. I looked from the barn to the house. I saw the sagging porch, the peeling paint, the years of neglect. I saw the overgrown fields, the collapsed fences. I saw a lifetime of hard work, a lifetime of struggle. And then I looked back at the barn, standing silent and proud, holding its secret for 60 years. It wasn't just a building. It was a promise that had been kept. My great-grandparents had made a choice. They chose the harder path. They chose to stand for something. They had passed that choice down through the generations, a fragile, unspoken inheritance, waiting for someone to be strong enough to accept it. My father couldn't. Maybe I could. I thought about the emptiness of my life up to that point, a life of being passed along, of belonging nowhere. I had nothing. But here I had a story. I had roots dug deep into this difficult, stubborn soil. I had a name, Whitman, and I was beginning to understand what it meant. It meant you don't run when things get hard. It means you don't sell out what's sacred. Ms. Whitman? Henderson said again, a note of impatience in his voice. I stood up straight. I took a deep breath of the clean country air. It smelled like pine and damp earth and possibility. Mr. Henderson, I said, and my voice was clear and steady, a voice I didn't recognize as my own. Thank you for the offer. I appreciate you taking the time to call me personally. Of course. So, shall I tell my clients we have a deal? No, I said. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. I'm sorry, I must have misheard you. You heard me correctly, I said. The answer is no. The property is not for sale. There was a longer silence this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the confusion, the recalibration. He had been expecting a grateful, desperate orphan, not this. I wasn't even sure who this was yet, but I liked her. Ms. Whitman, he finally said, his voice losing its smooth, friendly veneer and taking on a harder, more professional edge. With all due respect, I don't think you understand your situation. You have a massive tax debt to the county. You have no income. The house is likely condemned. This offer is not just your best option, it is your only option. If you refuse, in 89 days, you will lose the property anyway, and you will walk away with absolutely nothing. I understand that, I said calmly. You will be homeless, Ms. Whitman. You will have thrown away $1.5 million for what? A pile of rotting wood? For what? For a story. For a promise. For the memory of a poet I'd never met and the great-grandparents I was only just beginning to know. for the chance to build a life on a foundation of something real. "It's my pile of rotting wood, Mr. Henderson," I said, "and it's not for sale. Not now, not ever. Please inform your clients." And then I did something I had never done in my life. I hung up on him. I ended the call, cutting him off mid-sentence. I stood there, my phone in my hand, my heart beating like a drum. I was terrified, and I had never felt so alive. I had made a choice, a real one, my first one. I hadn't chosen the easy path. I had chosen the Whitman path. And for the first time, standing there in the overgrown yard of my ruined inheritance, I felt like I was home. The consequences of that choice arrived quickly. The next day, a certified letter came from the county tax office. It was a formal notice of intent to seize, printed in cold, bureaucratic language. It felt like a declaration of war. The 90-day clock, 88 days now, seemed to tick audibly in the quiet of the farmhouse. The money from the cash box went directly to Mr. Henderson, who, to my surprise, agreed to represent me after I called and explained. Not the whole story, not the secret of the barn, but enough. I told him I wanted to save my family's land. There was a long pause on the phone, and when he spoke again, the hard edge was gone. "It's a long shot, Ilara," he'd said, using my first name for the first time. "But we can file for a hardship extension, try to negotiate a payment plan with the county. It'll buy us some time. But you're going to need to show a good faith effort. You're going to need to work." Work was an understatement. The property was a beast that needed taming. I started with the house. For a week, I did nothing but clean. I hauled out garbage, swept away mountains of dust, and scrubbed floors until my hands were raw. I found a small generator in the shed and got a few lights working. The house slowly began to breathe again. It was still wounded, still scarred by neglect, but it was no longer a tomb. It was a start. After the house was habitable, I turned my attention to the land. The fields were choked with weeds and thorny brush that stood taller than I was. I bought a scythe in town, an old-fashioned, long-bladed tool that felt like it belonged in another century. The man at the hardware store, a grizzled old-timer named Ben, gave me a long look. "That's hard work, miss," he'd said. "What you clearing for?" "I'm staying," I'd said simply. He nodded slowly, a flicker of something like respect in his eyes. And so my days found a rhythm. I would wake with the sun, the cool morning air a shock to my system. I would work until my muscles screamed, swinging the scythe in long, sweeping arcs. Sweat and dirt became my new uniform. I was clearing the land, cutting back the chaos, one small patch at a time. It was brutal, exhausting work. There were days when I would collapse onto the porch at sunset, every part of my body aching, and the sheer scale of what I had undertaken would threaten to swallow me whole. The $1.5 million would whisper to me in my sleep. Easy, comfort, safety. But then I would look at the barn, its dark wood glowing in the twilight, and I would remember why I was doing this. I wasn't just clearing weeds, I was making a stand. One evening, about a month into my work, a dusty pickup truck rumbled up the driveway. It was Ben from the hardware store. He got out, holding 2 glass bottles of iced tea. He didn't say much. He just handed one to me, leaned against his truck, and looked out at the small portion of the field I had managed to clear. It wasn't much, a tiny square of order in a sea of wildness, but it was mine. "Heard you turned down the Sterling offer," he said, taking a long drink. News traveled fast in Sparrow Creek. I just nodded, too tired to speak. "Folks around here have been watching those vultures circle this place for a decade," he said. "Your father, he always seemed like he was just about to sell." He looked at me. "You're not like him." It wasn't a question. "I guess not," I said. He finished his tea and set the bottle down. My boy has a brush hog for his tractor. Sits in my shed most of the year. If you wanted to borrow it, it'd make short work of this field. I stared at him, speechless. A brush hog was a heavy-duty mower, the kind of equipment I could never afford to buy or rent. It was an offer of help, a real one. I can't pay you, I stammered. He just shrugged. Don't need you to. Some things are more important than money. He gave a small, wry smile. Besides, I'd rather look at a field than another row of beige McMansions. Let me know when you want it. He got back in his truck and drove away, leaving me on the porch with a cold bottle of tea and a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. It was the first time I realized I wasn't entirely alone in this fight. The community here, the one I never knew I had, was slowly revealing itself. They were quiet, watchful people, but they understood the value of land, of history, of standing your ground. Months have passed. It is autumn now. The air is crisp, and the leaves on the trees at the edge of the field have turned to fire. The field itself is clear. Ben's son came with the brush hog, and in one loud, dusty afternoon, he did what would have taken me a year to do by hand. I've started a garden. The house still needs a new roof, and the windows rattle when the wind blows, but it's my home. There's a fire in the hearth, and the rooms don't feel empty anymore. They feel full of purpose. Mr. Henderson managed to get the county to agree to a payment plan. It's steep, and I'll be paying it off for years, but it's manageable. I got a job waiting tables at the diner in town. It's not glamorous, but it's enough. The barn remains as it was, a silent, watchful guardian. I go in there sometimes, just to sit in the quiet and read the letters. I feel the presence of my great-grandparents, of Samuel Reed and his family. I feel a connection to a story so much bigger than my own. I haven't won yet. The fight isn't over. Sterling Development is still sniffing around, waiting for me to fail. The debt is still a shadow at my back. But something fundamental has changed inside me. I am no longer the girl who was handed a box. I am the woman who chose a legacy. I found more than a key in my father's toolbox. I found a compass. It pointed me toward the harder path, the one with more rocks and thorns, but it's the one that leads home. True north. This inheritance wasn't the land, or the house, or the money in the box. It was the story. It was the choice. And it's a choice I get to make every single morning when I wake up and decide to stay, to fight, to build. This journey taught me that home isn't something you're given. It's something you claim. It's something you fight for, bleed for, and build, board by board, choice by choice. It's not about four walls and a roof. It's about the story that holds those walls up. My story is just one, a quiet tale from a forgotten corner of the world. But I know so many of you have stories just like this. Stories of unexpected inheritances, not of money, but of values, of burdens, of choices that define you. What has your family passed down to you that's worth more than gold? I'd be honored if you'd share a piece of your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I believe in the power of sharing them. It's how we know we're not alone on these difficult roads. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in choosing the harder right over the easier wrong, please consider subscribing and becoming a part of this community. We're building a space here for people who understand that the most valuable things in life are the ones you can't put a price on. Thank you for listening and for being here.